Welcome to Tell the Story, the podcast where we bring you the real and raw conversations about resilience, growth, and a purpose after a life of service. I'm your host, Doug White, a veteran and retired first responder, and author of Hiding in Plain Sight, the truth about trauma, service, and the way forward. On this podcast, we focus on more than just origin stories and the challenges of service. We explore how veterans, first responders, and their families move forward and thrive. Through honest and thought-provoking discussions, we highlight resilience, perseverance, post-traumatic growth, and the opportunities that can be found in life's next chapter. This episode is proudly brought to you by Polestar Coffee, fueling the brave with the finest blends. Find them at polestarcoffee.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating. Every review helps spread the message and keeps us bringing these stories to life. Today, we welcome Dr. Kirk Parsley. He's a former Navy SEAL turned physician and sleep expert who has revolutionized the understanding of sleep and its critical role in health and performance. After serving in the Navy as a SEAL, Dr. Parsley pursued a medical degree from the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences and became an undersea medical officer at Naval Special Warfare Group 1. During his time with the SEALs, Dr. Parsley identified a recurring pattern of physical and mental health issues that he termed SEAL syndrome. It was rooted in chronic sleep deprivation, hormonal imbalances, and stress. He developed a holistic, science-backed approach to improving performance and recovery, which included his now renowned all-natural sleep remedy. Dr. Parsley is the author of Sleep to Win, How Navy SEALs and Other High Performers Stay on Top. He is a sought-after speaker and has been on several platforms like the Jocko Podcast, Team Never Quit, and the Everyday Warrior. His work has inspired countless individuals, from elite operators to everyday high achievers, to prioritize sleep as a cornerstone of resilience, recovery, and thriving. When he's not advocating for better sleep, Dr. Parsley dedicates his time to coaching, consulting, and creating solutions to improve human performance. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to share why this conversation is so meaningful to me and why it's a vital part of the larger series we're exploring here at Tell This Story. Dr. Parsley's work has had a profound impact on my journey. I first heard him speak on the Jocko Podcast, episode 367, and it was there that I began to understand the connection between sleep, resilience, and overall performance. That conversation sparked a year-long quest, a long burning fuse, for me to better understand what was going on with me, and it became a turning point in my journey towards healing and growth. This episode builds on a powerful series we've been creating here at Tell the Story with incredible experts like Dr. Chris Free, Lena Grunlow, Dr. Jennifer Byrne, and firefighter J.D. Miller. Together, we've been exploring the challenges and solutions surrounding trauma, resilience, and post-traumatic growth. Dr. Parsley's insights on sleep and its role in recovery and performance is a cornerstone of that discussion, and I couldn't be more excited than to bring his expertise here to this audience. Parsley, how are we doing today?
Oh, I'm doing better than I deserve. How about you?
I've heard that before. I'm doing well myself. Thanks for taking time out of your day to sit with us. I wanted to give a little bit of background before we dive in here. Those who have been listening to me for a while, and Doc, you're going to be new to me in the podcast here, but throughout my service, I noticed that I was having some of the physiological and neurological problems that come along with sleep, being the main one that I could put a finger on. And of course, all the emotional things that go along with the life of service. And for the better part of nearly 2 decades, I was looking for answers, quietly, hiding in plain sight, as it were. And in 2019, I had a breakthrough, and I started looking at getting help. I went through the VA and the Employee Assistance Program for the Sheriff's Office here at Dillsborough County in Tampa. And I was very nervous about going to places that may report back to my employer, and the stigma, of course, that goes along with all that. And that led me to a lot of podcasts, a lot of reading, peer-reviewed medical journals, stuff like that, trying to get a handle on what it was that I was experiencing. And just over 2 years ago now, listened to Jocko Podcast, episode 367, and you were on there. Basically, it was get to sleep. And I listened to that 3 hours, and I listened to it again and again. I probably listened to that podcast over the course of maybe 20 miles of running and driving just to try to soak it all in. And I was amazed at the work that you did and what you found through your journey and being a West Coast SEAL doc. And I want to dive into all of that. But the things you found led me to other medical studies. And over the course of about a year, that one episode and your experiences kind of lit the slow burning long fuse to get me to where I am today. It led me to peer-reviewed articles and studies like Operator Syndrome by Dr. Chris Free. I had him on just a couple of weeks ago, and his episode aired last week. So I wanted to have you here because you were the impetus to all of this and the study that you had done. And I want to make this part of a larger series here on Tell This Story with you. Of course, Dr. Free. I've had Lena Grunlow. She's an ETMS clinician that worked on my ETMS therapy just about 6 weeks ago. I finished that up. Dr. Jennifer Byrne and also firefighter J.D. Miller, who adapted Operator Syndrome, Firefighter Syndrome. So I want to put all that together to show the importance of sleep in just everyday health performance optimization and why that's important to veterans, service members, and first responders. So again, having you here is that's very important to this series, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing all that and having me on. It does me no good to speak in this office if I'm not on someone's podcast. So, yeah.
Well, I'm happy you're here. So tell us, I've given this long intro to Dr. Parsley is, but who is Dr. Kirk Parsley?
Well, we could wax esoteric with that. Yeah. So as you alluded to in your intro, I was a Navy SEAL first, right out of high school. I was young, naive, terrible student, grew up in rural Texas, and I didn't have any interest in college or any kind of sissy book learning stuff or any of that. I wanted to go do tough guy stuff. And so I went into SEAL training and then on the West Coast as a SEAL there. The story goes, met a girl, fell in love, got married. I was on the way to getting married. So I got out of the SEAL teams. I was in, we call it the Hollywood days. I had the first Gulf War, but not really anything worth writing home about, and just kind of seemed like we weren't really going to get in any more wars, and just training. So I said, I'll move on to do something else. And my only exposure to the only thing I was really interested in was health and fitness and athletic performance and so forth. And so I thought maybe I'd be a strength and conditioning coach or athletic trainer, or maybe a stretch goal of a physical therapist or something like that. And I got out of school, or I got out of the military, started college, got married, and sort of my stretch goal of being a PT required volunteer hours. PT school requires 2,000 hours of volunteer work just to apply. So I said, well, I better get started on that just in case. And so I started. I went down to San Diego Sports Medicine Center. That's where I'd been in the SEAL teams, so I was still there. I had to start in junior college because I was a high school dropout, didn't come anywhere close to graduating high school, and I started volunteering. They liked me. I almost immediately got a job. I think I volunteered for 3 or 4 days, and then they hired me as a PT aide, which basically just means you assist the physical therapist. And pretty quickly decided I didn't really want to be a PT, but it was in the genre of what I wanted to do. It was in that realm, but I didn't know exactly what. But that San Diego Sports Medicine Center was like the healthcare mecca. They had every kind of healthcare provider you could possibly imagine. And so the doctors there were a few years older than me because I'd been in the military for a little over 6 years, and they'd gone to college and medical school. So they're maybe 2 to 4 years older than me. And they started saying, well, you should go be a doctor. And I was like, yeah, come on. Like, let's be realistic. I'm not even a high school graduate. I'm going to junior college right now. And anyway, we had some great mentorship there, and some doctors kind of talked me into giving that a try. They're like, would you do it if you could? And I was like, of course. And they're like, well, then you really got to try, right? So I threw my hat in the ring, obviously, did well enough in college and MCAS and all that to get in. When I was actually looking through the review books to figure out which schools I'd be competitive for, that's when I found out that the military had their own medical school. I didn't know that. But I was already, yeah. So I was already married. I already had a kid, I had another kid on the way. So I looked into that and I was like, hey, they'll pay you to go to medical school instead of the other way around. And I was like, well, kind of hard to pass up. And I figured I'd get back to the SEAL teams and be able to give back to that community that was so instrumental in forming me as a man. And so, I decided to do it. Again, like my only exposure to medicine was like my own injuries. And so I thought of medicine as sports medicine and orthopedics. Like that's what I thought of when I thought of being a doctor. And so my whole medical school interest all went towards that. And then in the military, or in the Navy, when you go through their training pipeline, you only get to do your first year of residency. And then you have to go out to the fleet and be a general practitioner, essentially. And then you can go back and finish your residency. And that's how they have enough general practitioners. Otherwise, everybody would just specialize and stay in the hospitals. So when you go out to do that, you go to dive school and become a dive medical officer. You can go to flight school and become a flight surgeon, or you can just go wherever they put you and hope it's not a ship, I guess. And so I needed to go back. I needed to go to the dive program to be a doctor for the SEALs. And so I did that, went back to the SEAL teams. And I worked at that sports medicine center the whole time I was in college. And when I got to the SEAL teams, due to bureaucratic delay, they had just received their funding for something they'd agreed to do maybe 10 years before. And they just received their funding to build the very first sports medicine center the SEAL teams had ever had. And of course, I was very fortuitous. I was showing up at that time with my background. And they're like, well, we're going to put you in charge of building this thing out. And so that's what they did. And then I was part of a team of people that hired our first physical therapists and physical therapy assistants, strength and conditioning coaches and athletic trainers, nutritionists, like all that stuff. Then we organized to have orthopedics do rounds and come through there and evaluate our people, and pain medicine to come do rounds, and chiropractor and acupuncture and all this other stuff. And so then I was the least qualified guy around, the dumbest guy there. We hired great people from professional sports teams and D1 colleges and the Olympic Training Center. And we had just great talent there. And so, when you're the dumbest guy around in the military, they put you in charge and they say, well, now you're the supervisor, right? So I'm now the supervisor of this facility, which didn't really mean much to anybody, including me. I didn't really know what my job was. Just, I guess, make sure the place doesn't burn down and people do their jobs. And but I had an office in that center. And SEALs are a lot like professional athletes in that the worst thing that they can possibly imagine happening is getting taken out of their platoon. Like getting put on the bench is the worst outcome. So the most likely person to put them on the bench is their doctor. So they don't tell their doctors there's anything they don't have to tell their doctors. So, they do routine checkups and they just go and they go, hey, everything's great, man. Like I'm fine, no problems. And send me back to work. And then they'll go find a doctor out in town to treat their real problems and pay out of their own pocket so they don't get put on the bench. Now, fortunately, I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there were still a lot of SEALs there that I'd trained with and deployed with. And so I had some built-in trust. Obviously, I had a good enough reputation to where the guys trusted me. And one day a guy just came in and shut the door behind him and said, hey, let me tell you what's really going on with me. And he started listing out a litany of symptoms that I would later dub the SEAL syndrome because I lack imagination primarily. And it basically looks like metabolic syndrome. And if I would have showed their labs to a colleague and say, who do you think this patient is? They'd say 55-year-old man is 30 to 50 pounds overweight and doesn't exercise much. Like that's what their labs look like. And the guy sitting in front of me was 28 to 35-year-old SEAL with six-pack abs and, in great shape. What they were complaining of was a lot of mental stuff. So a lot of mental, emotional kind of blend psychology. So low motivation, low concentration, poor memory. It's just sort of a lack of mental vigor, like not being super interested in stuff, having a hard time paying attention to anything, even when it was really important to them. And again, everything's relative, but their lack of motivation to them is just as important as anybody else's lack of motivation. Even though most people would say he's still super motivated, to him, he doesn't feel as motivated as he usually is. And then a lack of performance. So just feeling like they couldn't perform athletically, physically, cognitively, getting weaker, getting slower, getting fatter, and doing everything they're supposed to be doing, like working with the nutritionist, working with the strength and conditioning coach, doing their breath work, doing like all the stuff they're supposed to do. And they couldn't perform to where they wanted to be. Now, the one thing they never complained of was lack of sleep. And that's due in large part to the fact that I probably chose the two professions in the world that value sleep the least, right? Special forces and being a doctor. And part of our training is to go a week without sleep just to prove to us that it's a luxury. And if you're hard enough and if you want it bad enough, you can push past the need for sleep, which is, of course, garbage. It works when you're 19 and you're in training, and the most complex thing you have to do is run down the beach with a boat on your head. That works. It doesn't work when you have to perform in the real world. So, however, I would get a list of all their medications, and it struck me, it was an embarrassing amount of time that went by. I don't remember exactly, but a lot of guys had come in and told me very similar stories, and just kind of went off. Light bulb went off one day. It's like, seems like a lot of these guys are taking Ambien. And then sure enough, I went back through my records, and every single guy who was sitting in my office was taking Ambien. And I thought, I wonder if that could be it. Now, I went to a Western medical school, right? I'm a Western trained physician. I didn't get a single class on sleep. I took a pharmacology class, and I knew that the sleep drugs were something we called GABA agonist. So it means they act like GABA. Benzodiazepines are the same thing. They're GABA agonists. And so I knew that kind of slowed neurological tissue down, but that's about it. I didn't really know what could Ambien be causing with sleep, and could sleep be causing any of these symptoms. And I didn't know because I didn't have a single class on sleep. So I had to educate myself on sleep. And then once I learned about what happens when you're asleep, and then I learned what Z drugs do, the sleep drugs do, and the alcohol does. And, most of the guys feels if one's good, two's better, three's great. So they're overdosing on Ambien and taking it with 3 or 4 cocktails or a 6-pack of beer or something. And so once I learned about sleep, and I was like, wow, what goes on in sleep is being disrupted when you're using alcohol and sleep drugs. So pretty much every symptom they've complained of could be explained by poor sleep, right? And so I didn't think for a second that it would explain everything, but I just wanted to see how big would the effect be. So he started convincing these guys to get off of Ambien and to decrease the drinking, if not completely stop it, and let's see what happens with their labs. Because because I had no solutions for them, when they came in and told me their problems, then I was like, I don't know, you don't have any diseases, but that's what I know how to deal with. So let's see if we can figure it out together. And so I just shotgunned literally every lab I knew how to interpret. I just sent them to get all of those labs done. And so it was 98 lab markers, and they came back, and their testosterone was low. Their total and free testosterone was low, and their DHEA was low, and their IGF-1 was low, and their DHT was low, and their estradiol was usually high, and their sex hormone binding globulin was high, and their stress hormones were high, and their inflammatory markers were high, and their oxidative markers were high. So kind of everything bad that should be low was high, and everything good that should be high was low. And so I said, well, let's see what happens when we do this. And, they were taking Ambien because they were having trouble sleeping. So I had to come up with something. I couldn't just take their Ambien and say, go home and sleep. So I went on really super traditional reference sites, like Cochrane Database and PubMed and NIH and things like that. And just said, what supplements help with sleep, right? Because one thing I learned was that while sleep drugs, we thought at that time, we don't think so anymore, but we thought at that time sleep drugs help you sleep. What are the side effects? And one of the side effects is that it decreases REM sleep by about 80%, and it decreases deep sleep by about 20%. And then alcohol does the opposite. So when you drink alcohol, you decrease deep sleep by 80% and REM sleep by 20%. So you take the two combined, you do the math, you get 0% sleep. And that's exactly what their sleep study showed. So their sleep study, I'd send them to do a sleep study, and it came back 99.999%. I don't think they went out that many decimal places. I think they said 99.9% stage 2 sleep, which isn't deep and it isn't REM, right? We call that the transitional. And so I got them to start taking supplements, and together we figured out kind of the best combination of what supplements to take. And then they're doing a little bit of hormone support in the day by taking, again, over-the-counter supplements like DHEA and pregnenolone and zinc, just to kind of support their testosterone production. And sure enough, I had guys whose testosterone markers, total and free testosterone were increasing, 300%, 400%. The inflammatory markers going down, oxidative markers going down, stress hormone going down, insulin sensitivity improving, anabolic hormones all going up, and their performance all started going up. Now, it wasn't a 100% solution. It may have been a 100% solution for a few of the guys, but I would say it was like 80% of the solution for 80% of the guys.
There was improvement enough for you to continue with your work.
Yeah. And Navy medicine and the big overarching kind of government medicine called BUMED, Bureau of Medicine, they weren't a fan of what I was doing. I kept getting smacked on the wrist and told not to do this and not to do that. And I was practicing outside of my scope, and that was voodoo. And there's no foundation for this, no foundation for that. And, I was treating my brothers. I didn't care what those guys thought. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, you tell me not to do it, I just won't tell anybody I'm doing it. But I'm going to help my brothers out, right? And so we just kept going, full speed. Of course, I was exonerated by all of it. And then I don't think it was Chris Free. I don't think he was there yet, but his colleagues at Naval Health and Research Center from Point Loma came over. 4 or 5 of them came and sat in my office for about 4 hours and just asked me what I was doing. And I showed them all my labs and told them what I was doing. And I told them my theories. And then that led to close to a decade of research for that organization to kind of look into everything I was doing. And they renamed the SEAL syndrome, the operator syndrome. Yeah, that doesn't hurt my feelings at all. We're all trying to do the same work, but validated a lot of what I was doing. And now it's pretty well known that all that stuff happens. The piece that I didn't kind of figure out until maybe the last year I was there was how big of an impact the brain injuries were having. When I went to medical school, we learned that if something had to physically contact your head and you had to be knocked unconscious to have a TBI. And of course, since then we figured out that's complete nonsense, that you can damage the brain and stay completely conscious, and you can damage the brain with overpressurization, like blast injuries. And if you shoot an M4 inside of a concrete room, it's approximately 35 Gs of force, and it takes a little over 1 G to cause a mild TBI, a mild traumatic brain injury. So, when you got 4 guys shooting in the room, and you do that 1,000 times a day, and you string out a career that, and then you do other things. Obviously, we have other blast injuries. You shoot an anti-tank weapon like a Carl Gustav, it's about 200 Gs for the guy shooting it. It's about 300 Gs for the guy spotting it. And so after a while, I figured out, well, everybody has brain injuries as well. And brain injuries interfere with hormone production as well, because the brain doesn't have anywhere to go when it swells, right? When you get inflammation in the brain, it just increases the pressure inside of your skull. And when you increase the pressure, you decrease the blood flow, because the blood pressure is only so much to overcome the internal pressure. And then you decrease the flow of cerebral spinal fluid and decrease neuronal function by building up waste products and getting less blood supply, less oxygen and all that stuff. And so all that needs to be corrected as well. And so now I spend about 70% of my time working with guys who are getting out of the SEAL teams. I do some other special forces guys, but not many. Like all my networking and connections are with my community. And I'm happy to see those other guys. And when people refer them, I treat them. And that's also my philanthropic work. When I was working there as a doctor, one of the things we did before our deployments was before and after, actually, is we did what's called pre and post retreats, where we would take the team that's deploying out to a resort and spend a couple of days teaching them about resources for them and their families when they're deployed. And we'd bring in, we'd bring in ringers, lecturers, people, New York Times bestsellers, and people who are professional lecturers or well-respected in athletics or whatever. And because I was free, I was always on the stage with those guys. They would alternate who they brought in for that, but I was always on the stage presenting my work for this. They introduced me to a bunch of kind of big names in the health and wellness space, and they started inviting me onto their podcast and going out to do lectures at different symposiums with them. And I became the sleep guy, and that's what everybody knows me for. but my practice is performance overall. So I do all lifestyle medicine, so sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation. And then I work with hormones and peptides and hyperbarics and supplements and psychedelics and whatever it takes to get people's functions back and get them, performing well. And I have private clients that pay me for that. And then like I said, I volunteer my time to help the community when guys get out, to kind of help them recapture their health and performance after getting beat down for 20 years in the military.
Well, until I heard you on the Jocko podcast, I had been experiencing a lot of this stuff. I had out of my mid to early 30s, I started having the issues with hormones, and luckily, my family practitioner was a sports medicine doc. And, I was a triathlete, runner, all of that stuff, and like you, my body weight was about 240 pounds when I was working, and that's just I was no matter what I did. That was it. Yeah, I could drag a car, but I could run a 6-minute mile, but
Right.
at the end of the mile. So I got my blood work done, and the total testosterone was like 168. Estradiol was almost estradiol, I think.
Higher than your testosterone, probably.
No, it was 78, which when I began is double. And again,
About triple what I would recommend. About triple what I'd recommend.
Yeah, well, they looked at that and said, okay, so we're out of whack. So that's all. It's a testicular hyperfunction. That's it. Here's medicine. Here's TRT and all that stuff. Here's a blocker if you need it. And it wasn't until years later when I started. Well, in 2019, I got a sleep study, and it lasted for 2 hours and 38 minutes.
Mm.
And I said, well, you have obstructive sleep apnea. Right. Well, whatever that means. So now I've got that. But of course, I've got the chronic pain. I've got the daytime napping, the irritability, still can't focus, can't take weight off no matter what I did. I did in one season, I did 3 half-iron distance triathlons one season, in addition to the sprints and Olympics that I'd already done.
Yeah.
Not losing any weight. And I never connected all of that stuff together until I heard you talk about all of the things, like you said, was it shin splints? It was knee injuries or something like that, that the NFL PTs, they were saying like 1 or 2 a season, where you were seeing 2 and 3 a day or a week. I mean, it was just the wear and tear on the body. And just as Chris recalls it, the allostatic load. I didn't piece any of that stuff together until I heard you speaking. And then I started looking at that stuff, and I dove into the study that came out of that and everything else, and found out that all of these things feed one another. But in your work, if you're not sleeping, your brain is not clearing out the toxins, all the workout and all the training you did, your muscles aren't healing. So you're starting from a deficit the next day.
Right.
All of these things. And it took probably up until April or May of this year to get it all sorted out. And the TBI thing was never on my radar because what I recall, I had never been knocked unconscious. Now, I did not training.
Right.
But, and it certainly never went to the doc. I mean, I spent my last 10 years of my service, I was active reserve at SOCOM on the PSD. And of course, we had our own doc, we had our own clinics and all that stuff. And broke my ankle and had ruptured ligaments during PT. And it wasn't until the next day when the chief said, hey, what doc said? Oh, I haven't been yet.
Yeah.
I've got a purple ankle. So I can relate to all of that and hiding the injuries. But I didn't piece any of that together. And going back to the TBIs, doing a bomb squad for 7 years in the sheriff's office was a brazier. And I thought blast overpressure, maybe that's really cool because the dirt kicks up in her face. Yeah. I've got pieces of door jam and hide. So exciting. My goggles and my helmet. Yeah. But holy shit, now there comes a point where you're not doing math so good. They're able to hold a pencil well. You realize that those are going to be issues that affect the hormone imbalances in the sleep. And because of your work and the studies that I've read and educating doctors and trying to get them to speak to one another, because it's still voodoo. It's not pharmacological to them. They can't give me a pill to help it. So they're still not understanding how all of that connects, which is amazing to me because there are people that have found out that the physiological and the neurological pretty much go hand in hand. And
imagine that your body's all one organism.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And the brain, the largest, I believe it's the single largest consumer of the energy and the glucose in your body. And don't worry about your brain. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's about 25% of you use about 25% of all energy production in your body every day.
That's amazing.
And it's 10 pounds, So it's like whatever, 1/24 of your weight and 25% of the energy.
Yeah. Well, once I've got everything sorted out with my blood work and my sleeping, and I've gotten all that regulated, I'm sitting in at 218 to 225 on any given day. So eating clean, watching what I put in my body, sleeping. I've had to cut out all alcohol. I do love the taste of a good bourbon, but I know if I have a drink, my sleep is shit for the night.
Yeah.
Either it's going to be heartburn, whatever it's doing to my brain.
I'm the same way. And some of that just gets worse as you get older,
Yeah, I don't like it because I'm 51 and I still like bourbon, but I like my sleep better. But
yeah.
One of the things going back to the early to late 2000s, having our own dock, we had a rule with Andy traveling coast to coast. The rule was one Andy and one beer.
Right.
You're not traveling with the boss. You're going to sleep from Tampa to Los Angeles. No worries.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not really sleeping. And I don't know that I ever had a script Arabian. I don't have a pocket full of them, but I don't believe I ever had a script. But
the SEALs were the same way. Yeah, the SEALs were the same way. They just gave it to them by the handful, like before. Yeah, it's just like Motrin. It's the same. And it was thought to be completely benign, and medical education is run by the pharmaceutical industries, I don't think there's any kind of malicious plan to it. It's just the way the funding works, like the pharmaceutical industries have to pay people to do their research. So who are they going to pay? The most prestigious guys they can, which is medical school professors. And then those guys are going to teach the next generation of doctors what they know, which is what they've been researching, So the other thing one big flaw in the system is that when the pharmaceutical industry applies for a patent, they do the research and they own the research and they give the FDA what they want to give the FDA, and they don't have to give the FDA all of the research until they get sued. And if they get sued, well, then they have to give all the research to prove that they weren't hiding anything. And so, when I learned about Ambien, man, it was like the best drug ever invented, because the benzos like Valium and Xanax and those things, those help you sleep. Everybody knew they helped you sleep, but they were addictive and they could suppress breathing, and then you could die from them. And so everybody was so impressed with it when these new category of Z drugs came out, that they weren't addictive and you could use it every night and there was no side effects and they wouldn't decrease your respiratory rate and you wouldn't die from them. And so they just started freely handing them out. And then, once they got sued and the real research comes out, that's because they had only been sued like the year before all of this started for me. It was fortunate, again, very fortuitous timing that they had already been sued, and so I could get the real information. Had it happened 3 years earlier, I might not have suspected it. But like I said, it decreases REM, interferes with what we call the sleep architecture, which is just what the histogram looks like. And it only helps you fall asleep on average 13 minutes faster. And on average, you sleep 37 minutes longer. But if you're decreasing REM sleep by 80%, deep sleep by 20%, it's a net loss. Yeah, it's a net loss. And so that's why they're not so popular anymore, because all that happened. And, and it's a dissociative. So, the way the pharmaceutical industry works is they find a mechanism, there are thousands of things that change in your brain and body to lead to you being asleep and staying asleep and then eventually waking up. But they choose one thing that's effective. It's like, well, when the GABA molecule binds to neurons, it makes those neurons harder to fire. And that's really what being asleep is, right? Your brain still works. It's just like you disengage your brain from your environment. So you're not paying attention to sounds and smells and lights and all that other stuff. But your brain's still capable of it. It's just it's at a lower resting potential, so it's harder. That's why somebody has to shake you awake and not just touch you awake, or super bright lights or really loud noise or something. Because your brain, everything's still working, but that GABA molecule slows the brain down. And they said, well, okay, GABA will bind that receptor and let's say have an effect of 1. Well, then we made this thing called a benzodiazepine, which that'll bind the GABA receptor, and it has 100 times the effect of a GABA molecule on that GABA receptor. So that's better, right? And then Well, the Z drugs have 1,000 times that effect. And so the Z drugs just like completely turn off your brain from interacting. But interestingly enough, you can stay conscious and you can have conversations and you can get in your car and drive somewhere and do all kinds of stuff and not have any recollection of it. And that's why they got sued, because people were going to casinos and gambling away their life savings and going home and getting back in bed and waking up the next day with no recollection of it whatsoever, or picking up prostitutes or going to eat. Because you'll do the lizard brain behaviors, right? The primal, the fighting, feeding, fornicating, right? Like the whole pathway. Like that's what you'll do. You'll do that primal behaviors, and then you go home and go to sleep. I coached my son's football team, and one of the moms of one of the athletes there told me a story during this same time period. You know, she said, you know, her doctor gave her some Ambien, and she was divorced, and her kids split their time. And so her kids were all at their dad's house, and she's a nurse, and she's like, I'm going to get a great night's sleep. And so she took an Ambien. And then the next day she came down and found her house completely disarrayed, all disheveled. And so she ran back upstairs and called the cops and thought someone was in her house. It was her. She had been down there like eating Twinkies and, you know, crappy kids' food and cooking ramen. And because she wasn't really with it, she's knocking things over, and like the whole house was a mess. Yeah. So they definitely have some effects there, but they have some long-term effects as well. Not the least of which being that if you work shift, say if you're law enforcement, first responder, something like that, and you work shift work for a career, if you work night shift for a career, you die on average about 14 to 16 years earlier than the general population. And interestingly enough, if you have chronic insomnia, it's the exact same numbers. And if you take Ambien or you take sleep drugs chronically, exact same numbers. So I don't think the Z drugs do anything to cause you to die earlier. They just don't do anything to help you sleep, right? Because we've already seen if you're an insomniac, you die earlier. If you do shift work, you die earlier because you're out of circadian rhythm. Or if you take the Z drugs or not, you may think you're sleeping, but it's obviously not sleep, or it would add years to your life, and it doesn't.
That's amazing to me. I heard you talk about some of the science about the cognitive issues, being legally drunk, that having alcoholic drinks versus not sleeping. The cognitive comparison is pretty much similar. Of course, there's a limit. So decision making and all that stuff, every one of those things is affected by poor sleep or non-restorative sleep.
Yeah, and that was what was fascinating to me. Now, something I didn't mention is because this was I started working with the SEALs in 2009. So they had already done a bunch of heroic stuff and were already in the media and kind of had a bit of a celebrity status to them. When I was young and I was a SEAL, nobody knew what a SEAL was. I'd tell my high school friends I was a SEAL, and they asked me if that meant I worked at SeaWorld.
Yes, that's what it means.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So, but what happened though with them kind of getting their celebrity status, I could call anybody. I'd read somebody's book, or I'd watch somebody lecture, watch somebody's TED Talk, go to a symposium where somebody's lecturing, and I'd just go talk to them, be like, hey, I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL team, so here's what I'm struggling with. So I got to learn a lot really quickly. One of the really fascinating things to me was how impaired people are with sleep deprivation. And we're not, our self-assessment sucks, right? Because the organ that we're assessing ourselves with is the organ that's not working well, right? And so when I started learning that, I was like, well, man, not only are we crushing these guys metabolically and physiologically, they're going on target for the large part after not really sleeping for a couple of days. Because it's not like things are planned months in advance, right? You go on a deployment and a tasking comes down, and you have a very tight window to get ready to go do that. And then you have to go do that. And that very often does not involve a whole lot of sleep. And so I'm just thinking, all right, well, we have all these metabolically, hormonally, physiologically crushed guys, and then we're sending them out to a target when they're performing as though they haven't really slept for a couple of days, which is a performance on par with a blood alcohol level of 0.2. And so I'm like, they're going in there shooting around each other, and like everybody's moving and shooting, communicating, and people are shooting back at them. And they're impaired. They're impaired in every way we could impair them, essentially. And so, yeah, we train them to a very high degree. But what if we sent them on target, like in a physiologically robust situation, right? And there's a limit to that. Like I always say, it's like first responders and law enforcement will come ask me, what can I do about my shift work? I'm like, not work shift work. I mean, that's really the answer, right? But somebody has to do it, right? I mean, you can't just tell the criminals, hey, time out until the sun comes up and then we'll re-engage this. That's not the way the world works. And the same thing with combat. Obviously, there's a huge advantage to doing things at night. The best advice I have for people is, try to convince your leadership to rotate that. And I know even a lot of the cops and first responders don't want to rotate it because they build their life a certain way and like this is their schedule. But if you really want to look out for the well-being of everybody, you just have to adjust it. And I was really surprised at the amount of buy-in I got at the SEAL teams. When I first started, I literally got laughed out of the room. They're like, "Oh, doc, you're so dumb. Like, you need to go back to medical school." Because I'm trying to tell them, I think, because they did know they had these hormone problems. They just didn't know why. And I'm like, "Hey, I think it's from sleep deprivation." And they're like, "Okay, whatever." Like, you're in the special box over there. Eventually, really just because proof was in the pudding, right? When those guys started applying what I told them to do, and they had great performance out of it, they're like, okay, well, this is obviously true. And so they started adjusting training and the sleeping, the barracks and so forth of the training sites, and how much time they gave people to sleep, and keeping red lights on when everybody's supposed to sleep. So even if they aren't sleeping, you're not at least getting that component of it. And I consulted with some tier 1 guys a couple of years ago by chance out here in Texas, and I didn't know any of them. They're all obviously a lot younger than me. But every one of them, man, they knew everything about sleep. As I started questioning them, like the one thing they had down was like how much sleep they needed, hygiene, sleep behavior. And I was like, I'm done. Like I don't need any more success in life. That's plenty for me right there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Going from being in the special box to actually changing doctrine.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too long after you separated from the Navy that SOCOM decided to call you back and say, hey, can you talk to us about this thing that, what years earlier they were shaking their fingers at you and telling you to go sit in the corner and color, but now you're back in keynote over on the hill. So that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, it was let's say it was about 5 years after I got out, and they said, hey, would you come to SOCOM and lecture our medical staff and let us record it and put it on our portal? And I'm like, of course, yeah. And they paid me to do it, and I was just like,
did you slide a piece of paper across the desk upside down? Said,
yeah. Like ultimately,
my picture would have been check.
But in fairness, the SEAL community was never they were never against me. Like there were people who didn't believe yet, but the guy, as soon as higher levels of medicine started cracking down on me, the SEALs all defended me very, very robustly and saying, this is working and we need this. And I remember one of the guys who, one of the key figures for launching an investigation on what I was doing one time, came down to my office just pouring with sweat. And he was like, hey, you got to call your guys off. And I was like, what are you talking about? He goes, I have people giving me death threats to my face. I was like, hey, I haven't said a word. I don't know what to tell you.
You have some passionate patients. What can I tell you?
Yeah.
That's really awesome. And based on the timeline, I'm thinking 2018-ish is when they called you here to come speak to the doctors.
Yeah, right about then. I got out in January of 2013. So yeah, right around there.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know the timeline on this, but I know that in recent years, probably the last 5 or 6 years, SOCOM's initiatives with the preservation of the force and family have been huge in moving the level of care here for veterans, operators here in the Tampa area and really in the Central Florida region. From my own experience, the legislators here, Governor DeSantis, have really taken hold of what they're doing at the command, looking at hyperbarics, ETMS therapy. Yeah. Not so much psychedelics because there's still some voodoo surrounding that, but I think that's getting traction. But
that'll come into its own.
Yeah, no, it will, because like you said in the beginning, there's millions of vets and responders out there, and there's a million different combinations of things that are going to work.
Right.
Find the sweet spot for them.
Yeah, and nothing works for everybody, and nothing works forever. And it's like you just keep rotating the tools in and out. I had a guy, coming in my office as he was getting med boarded out of the military, and he was quite bitter about it. And he was a very big, intimidating, angry man. And he ran our combatives program until he got kicked out of that for being too combative and too aggressive. And he was a 280, 290 pound big man, and he was so angry at the military and medicine, and he came in my office every day and bitched and complained. And I thought if anybody was ever going to murder suicide in my career, that was the time I was afraid of it. And he eventually got out, and about 6 months later, I saw him out in town at a fundraiser, and he sat across the table from me and talked to me for 20 minutes before I figured out who he was. And this is a guy I'd talked to for hundreds of hours, but he was so different. And I said, what in the world has gone on? Like, what's changed? He had been in a vehicle that was hit by an IED, and he had broken his neck, and he had all sorts of issues. He had been on all kinds of psych medications, and that's what he's getting med boarded out for. And when he got out of the military, he threw all of his medications in a trash can, and he got on a plane, and he flew down to Peru, and he lived in the Amazon with a shaman for 30 days and did Kundalini yoga and did ayahuasca like every third night or something. And that was the first time that I ever considered for a moment that there was any benefit to anything like that. But I mean, I'd seen him exhaust everything that Western medicine had for him, and he just kept getting worse. He was literally worse every year of treatment. He was getting progressively worse. And now he's very successful, has a very successful production career in LA, and like vets, and teaches the Kundalini yoga that he practices, and has his own foundation and all this other stuff. And he was a write-off. Western medicine literally had nothing for that guy, and I firmly believe he'd be dead right now if he hadn't figured that out. And so when I had another patient really struggling, I figured out a way to help him get treatment. He's very close to me. He's like a guy I'd been through training with. I'd known my whole life. And, he was out of the military also, fortunately, so we could do that. And we went down to Mexico and got him treated. And it was the most miraculous transformation I've ever seen in my life. And I have a lot of colleagues who are neurologists and psychiatrists and psychologists. And I have one friend who's all three, and they all say the same thing. It's like, we don't have anything that comes anywhere close to psychedelics. Like the efficacy of psychedelics is 10 to 20 years of what neurology and psychiatry combined can do. So they'll eventually make it. There's a lot of prejudice against them, and there's a lot of potential for abuse and malfeasance and all that other stuff. So there's regulatory issues to figure out, but it's definitely a very powerful tool, and it'll come into its own.
Well, they figured all that stuff out with Ambien and Xanax, the misuse and the abuse of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think if it works for the people who are suffering the most and who, I don't want to say earn, but
yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you,
and those are the effects of their service. Nobody deserves to be able to try what works for them.
Yeah,
those guys.
And I can tell you too, it's like, I've always been like, the reason I got in trouble with the SEAL teams is because I've always been the guy who said, whatever works. Like, if it works, we're going to do it. And I can tell you, if I felt that anybody that I knew or cared about needed that, I would help them do it, man. I mean, like, we would figure out a way to get that treatment done because it works. Like I said, not 100% success rate. Nothing works for 100% of the people, but it's a very powerful tool. And they can only keep it at bay so long, with the way travel is now, air travel and like communication, people like it. America's just going to be surrounded by little islands of clinics that provide stem cells and psychedelics if we don't bring it into the house. And RFK said he's going to bring it all into America. So hopefully he does.
These are exciting times.
These are exciting times. Yeah. Yeah.
So when you left the Navy and you continued to do the medicine and all that stuff with performance and optimization, I noticed in my studies, and I've heard you say it too, that the optimization of these people and performance, keeping them, well, let me go back a little bit, making them aware that these are the things that are happening to their bodies and these are the things we can do to mitigate this along the way. More sleep during training, sleep schedules, better diet, red lights instead of, lights on, all the sleep hygiene, everything. That goes a lot to keeping these men and women and first responders, the operators, and even military at large, operational for longer at better levels. They don't get that burnout. They say that when cops retire, their lifespan is 57 years old,
Right.
which scares the hell out of me because I retired a year and a half ago and I'm 51 now. So I feel like I have a lot of life left to live and a lot of stuff to do. But the 14 years off your life, the shift, I wrote it down. That's incredible. I can't. Jesus, it's twice as bad as smoking.
Yeah, that's a damning statistic. It really is. So the World Health Organization classifies shift work as a type 2A carcinogen. So that's the same classification as cigarette smoking. The layman's explanation of that is, we're pretty sure this causes cancer, but it would be unethical for us to study that.
No, it's
2A, right? It's just code for yeah, it does, but we can't prove it because it would be unethical to prove it. But we have enough data to strongly suspect it. So if you believe cigarette smoking shortens your life, you should believe that sleep deprivation shortens your life.
Sleep is the great equalizer. I had been experiencing all of the things, and I was able to hold them at bay for a long time.
Right.
I was high functioning, high performing. Nobody on the outside knew anything that was going on with me. On all outward appearances, I was winning.
Yeah.
I was promoted, went back to the street on the midnight shift, and I maintained for a good year. But there came a time in late 2019 or mid 2019 when I was sleeping. After about 6 months, I was sleeping an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours a day. And that was days on and days off.
Yeah.
The wheels had finally come off because, when you're sleeping, you can manage. When you're not sleeping, the things that you were able to manage, you can't keep a lid on the stuff.
Yeah.
Walk us through real quick sleep hygiene. Then I want to touch on the Dr. Parsley sleep room. That's exciting stuff.
Yeah. So sleep hygiene, I think it's kind of more of a marketing term than anything else,
Well, we do to sleep, but what are the practices we could?
No, I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that a lot fits into that box. It's kind of nebulous, but really, every sleep hygiene is really just a group of behaviors, tactics, strategies that you can apply to sort of ritualize your sleep and put yourself in the best possible scenario to get the best sleep you can get, right? To set everything up in your favor, really, right? But it's actually really simple. You can subdivide it down into all sorts of things that you can sell and make money off of, which is why I think it's kind of a marketing term, but it's really three things, right? So we evolved to be on this planet. We're part of this planet. We're part of we're part of this planet that certain people are passionate about saving. It's like, yeah, we're part of that needs to be saved. Like we're all part of it. All the animals are part of it. We're one of the animals. And we evolved to be on this planet, and we use the sun as our cue. Rural electrification was only like 120 years ago. It's really not that long ago that people didn't have lights at night, and we definitely didn't have computers and cell phones and all that other jazz. And so there wasn't much to do at night. So it wasn't really a problem until recently. And we use the sun as our cue because we're a visual animal and we don't see well at night. And we're not a great predator, period, unless we have weapons, right? And so it behooves us to kind of get off the streets at night and go tuck away someplace safe. And when the sun comes back out, go be a full human again. And so, the blue light in the sky, we have ganglia in the back of our eyes, nerve cells that sense blue light. They have nothing to do with vision. They just sense blue light. And my guess is because the sky's blue, right? And so when the blue light goes away, that tells our brain, hey, it's time to get ready to go to sleep. You've probably heard of the hormone melatonin that gets secreted from the gland in the back of your brain, the pineal gland. Just kind of this circuitous pathway goes from your eyeballs back to that. And that's interesting if you're a doctor or something, but you don't need to know it. You secrete melatonin, and melatonin is like the starter pistol of the whole thing, right? That begins the orchestra, and then hundreds of things change, and they keep changing all over the night. But one of the first things that changes robustly is the production of that neuropeptide I was talking about earlier, GABA. And GABA slows down the brain, like I was saying, right? So melatonin initiates the cascades, lots of things start to change. GABA comes out and starts slowing down the brain, creating a barrier between you and your environment. And because we didn't have HVAC, the planet got colder, the sun went down, and you got colder. And so those are the triggers really for going to sleep. Decrease blue light, decrease the activity that in which you're engaging in your environment, and decrease your body temperature, right? So those are things like, I'm going to keep my environment, my sleep environment, very dark and very cold and very comfortable. When you lay in your bed, you move around, you roll around, you move around your bed, because you're seeking a cool spot. Like Tempur-Pedic mattresses really hold heat in, and they'll make you hot, and you'll have to move. And if you're in REM sleep, you're paralyzed. So you have to come out of REM sleep to be able to move. And so all of these are parts of sleep hygiene, but basically it's, decrease the blue light, decrease the activity, decrease your body temperature, and then try to stay as comfortable as you possibly can, right? So if your bed's too hard, it decreases blood supply, you'll have to move. If your bed's too soft, you're kind of sinking into it, it can hurt your joints, and then you'll have to move for pain. Or if your bed's too hot, you'll have to move around to find a cool spot, things like that. But that's pretty much all sleep hygiene is. I always tell people, if you've ever had a kid or you've ever been a kid and you think about that whole bedtime ritual to get you get a 5-year-old boy to quit banging his trucks together to go to bed, you don't just take him from his trucks and put him in the bed and turn off the light, right? There's protracted ritual, right? Right? You dim the lights, you say, hey, no more banging trucks together, work on your puzzles, we're going to do quiet stuff. Then you put them in a bath because that drops their body temperature, and then you cover them with powder and put on their fluffy pajamas because that, decreases sensory to their skin, makes everything feel comfortable. You put them in a dimly lit room that's in a nice comfortable bed, and they feel safe next to their mom and dad. You read them the story. You don't read them a story that's exciting and revelationary to them. You read them a story they've heard 1,000 times, so that it's just something to lull them into comfort and security and safety, and they fall asleep. So we need all the same thing as an adult. You don't need onesies and powder necessarily, but you need that ritual.
But if I could find a onesie for a 6'1", 220-pound man,
yeah,
I'd buy it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, you and I are the same. You and I are the same size. I'm 6'1". Yeah, 6'1", 240-ish, but yeah. I'm 240 if I'm lean. I'm 240 if I'm doughy. So that's just, my body knows that weight. So whatever. That's just how it works.
I don't understand that, and I reject it.
Yeah.
Because, I raced Clydesdale as a athlete.
Yeah, I did the same. I for some reason I thought it'd be smart to run triathlons in medical school and residency. I don't know why, but I
don't know how you found it. I was thinking to myself when I heard it first, man, I find time to train. I barely.
Well, it was a 22-ish mile bike ride to work and back. So I had that.
No, when you continue with the story, I was like, okay, it's cheap. Multitasking. I like it. Saving gas too.
Yeah.
But no matter how hard I train, and I smashed the swim. I swam competitively all the way through grade school, middle school, and high school. So the swim was nothing for me. Bike, I'm a big guy. So we got leg muscles, smash the bike, but the run sucks because you're smashing your feet into the pavement at 200 pounds, but
trying to get the pavement to submit.
I'll beat this pavement. And then you get to the sand, it's like, oh, this sucks because now it's not hard.
Yeah.
No matter what I was doing, no matter how many miles I ran, cycled, and I could go on a bike. 100 miles was nothing because I had calories to burn. I had plenty on board, but no matter what, I would get done, and I'd want to crush a pizza and burritos. Yeah, I was not losing weight, no matter what I did with my nutrition. If I just did nutrition to fuel, that was it. But I would.
Well, your hormone profile proves that you weren't in any place to be losing weight. Like you were doing those triathlons on sheer grit.
Yeah, most likely. And I think for my mental well-being, that probably staved off a lot of the issues that I later found. And if it weren't for that physical fitness, I would have been a dumpster fire years prior.
I was going to say that earlier when you were saying that you felt like you performed well Like I can tell, by looking at you in your story that you stayed in a lot better shape than a lot of law enforcement. They let go of the rope those last 10 years, and a lot of those guys have blown out. And it's really easy to do, as you alluded to, because you're metabolically broken, your fuel partitioning's off, your appetite regulation's off, your fat storage, leptin sensitivity, ghrelin sensitivity, all that's off. All your hormones are off. And even if you could control your eating well and eat very healthily, your body's just not doing the right things with the fuel, because the only time any animal on this planet sleep deprives themselves is when they're in famine or if they're being stalked. And so evolutionarily, it makes a lot of sense that our brains probably perceive that same thing. There's a lot of stress hormones involved, and your body's basically running around near fight or flight. And that's a catabolic state. That's not a state where you're repairing and building back. That's a state where you're trying to survive. And your body will do what it takes to survive. And muscle's expensive and fat's cheap to hold on to. A lot of calories in it.
I would say that I was in that condition from my military time and sheriff's office time, just over 30 years. So yeah, I would say the better part of 25 years I was there. And it wasn't apparent to me until after I retired. Several months after I retired, I was with my wife, and everything was fine. We were going to a concert at a church. So it's not like it was a rough concert, or if I was going to go see, Five-Finger Death Punch or anything like that. By the way, they're great live. But I pulled up to this intersection. I'm in the passenger seat. Everything's cool. And I realized I'm in my old patrol zone. And on each of the four corners of this intersection, I've been in a fight, a shooting, or a stabbing, and several times in each of those intersections. And my body went into such a state.
Yeah.
And fight or flight, I was ready for the attack. I was looking on all corners, and I had to do something with that energy, but there was nothing to do because there was no attack. And the first time I realized that my body, having been out of now, it was the first time that was the default that my body did every time I suited up and went to work. That for 30 years, that was my natural state. It scared the hell out of me. It's like, man, that all day, every day for 12 to 14 hours.
Yeah.
10, 20, 30 years. And that's what's killing us. But anyway, enough about me.
I had a really good buddy, really close friend of mine. He was Austin PD. And he and his wife were both Austin PD, and they retired during COVID because of the mess out here. And he was 50 and went to the gym, stayed fit, did his whole physical and everything. When he got out, I helped him with performance stuff, but he didn't have any, we weren't managing any diseases. We just a little performance enhancement here and there. And he died about a year and a half after getting out. And that was the most personal that's ever been to me, because it was I've been teaching those stats forever, right? But to actually be that close to somebody, and he was at my house the day before he died, and I was the last phone call he made before he died. Second, I told him to call 911 because he just had an atypical presentation. He only felt nauseous. There was no other symptoms. He was having a heart attack, and there was just some intuition in my mind said, hey, call 911. And he died on the phone with 911. And we're the type of people who do military and law enforcement, all that stuff. They're robust people who are used to suffering, used to struggling, and it's part of who they are. It's part of what they pride themselves on, is the ability to dissipate entropy, to carry the load and do hard things. Yeah, when the SEALs get out of the military, they don't call me. They call me a year or two after they get out, because they don't realize what you're talking about. They don't realize that they're compensating for so many things until they get out, right? Every SEAL I ever knew had a hyper-organized backpack, and everything he needed was in his backpack. And if you turned off the lights and blindfolded him, he could find everything within a matter of seconds. But that was a compensatory technique, man, is because their brains were suffering so badly, their lives would fall apart if they didn't do that. But they don't recognize that, because it's what your community does. It's what everybody does. And all the cops that you knew and you all did the same things. And so everything felt normal. And so once you get out, you're like, hey, this is normal. This isn't how everybody else lives. And actually, my friend, to make this story even sadder, my friend wanted to start something like I do for the SEALs. He wanted to start that for law enforcement, and he launched his own podcast. His name is John Wayne Stevenson, so he called his podcast John Wayne Reloaded, which is a really catchy, cool name. And he and I did a podcast. And when he was at my house that night, he's like, "Hey, look!" And he shows me his phone. He goes, "Our podcast just dropped." And I knew him because he had heard me on podcasts, and he found me, and like that's how we became friends. And so I think it was like full circle, just like this really cool story. He posted our podcast, all as one podcast, 6 hours and some change. It's the longest podcast probably ever published. And then he died the next day, man. Like what a tragedy, right? Such a tragedy. Yeah. Now, I think that was his 5th or 6th podcast that he launched. Ours was the first one he recorded it, but he launched it in a certain order for a certain reason. Yeah, it was just, yeah, tragic. So motivated me even further to help that community even more. Do everything I can for all kinds of first responders, LEOs, ER docs, whatever.
And people who work at night and see the worst.
Yeah,
it's all the same thing. Well, that's really what I'm trying to do here with Tell the Story and my book, Hiding in Plain Sight. I wanted to make sure that we got as much of this out there as we could to let people know, one, that these are physiological and neurological changes. It has nothing to do with times. This is wear and tear of the body after years and years of service. It's Andy Stump said it on his podcast. There's a cost doing this business, and you'll pay the price.
Right.
And we do. And we do it gladly. And I don't even think it's a conscious thing.
Yeah.
But it should. I think we need to front load these folks coming into the service and into the responder disciplines, letting them know that these are the things you can expect. These are the things you can do to mitigate, get ahead of them and stay ahead of them and be optimized throughout your career. Sleep being the most important thing to recognize that. And I think the emotional changes or the neurological changes that go along with that stuff. That being said, partially sleep remedy. I know that came about with your work with teams and has become its own thing. And I love watching your Instagram channel. And it's always either falling off a pogo stick or some awesome cowboy hat or slamming weights all over the place.
Yeah.
Then you give out your little nuggets and tidbits. But what's up at the sleep remedy?
I got a great social media kid, man. He's 27 years old. And he's all full of all kinds of ideas. I hate social media. It's kind of a necessary evil of what I do. And so I just say, tell me what to do, man. Can you come over?
Pogo stick. And I had to get close to the screen. I was like, I know that big man is not on a pogo stick. I'm not getting that high.
Yeah. That's a lot of fun. Yeah. So what I alluded to earlier, when I wanted to get the SEALs off of Ambien, we had to replace that with something. And that's really when I came up with this formulation. It's evolved slightly, but not much at all. There are other things that help. There's kava root and lemongrass. There's different herbs and botanicals and things I don't know. Like, it's not my expertise. I haven't taken it upon myself to learn those things. But basically, I just looked up very, very traditional medical guidance that's been around for 50, 60 years. Like what helps with sleep. These are all things that are ordinarily in your body. So it's really just kind of like the melatonin production pathway, which starts with tryptophan and goes to 5-hydroxytryptophan. And then you need vitamin D3 and magnesium to turn that into serotonin, and serotonin becomes melatonin. And then you produce some GABA and so we just kind of figured out the right dosage of all that to get everybody healthy. And I was giving it to them in a handout, and they were, this is pre-Amazon Prime, right? So they're having to go around to all the different health food stores and buy everything individually. And it was a pain for them. And the SEALs really just harangued me into making it into a product. And I made it as a nighttime tea because I wanted to put it in those foil packets, those little stick pouch, so people could grab a handful of them and throw them in their cargo pocket and be done. Because those things are kind of indestructible. You can get them wet, you can get them hot, you can get them cold, whatever. It doesn't matter. You can smash them. And I thought I had a brick and mortar practice in San Diego at that time. My thought was, okay, I'll leave practice for a year. I'll start the supplement thing going. I'll get a contract with SOCOM or something, and then I'll just go back to clinical practice. And I had to pay the bills by consulting, kind of the telemedicine like what I do now. And so that's what I did. And, that was 10 years ago, and I'm still running the supplement company. I still don't have a SOCOM contract, but it turned out to be a very successful little business. And so I do it. But the only thing that's really changed is I'd say maybe 5 years after I got out, I added L-theanine, which is an amino acid that makes GABA work a little better, because GABA is hard to get into the brain. So you kind of give it every edge you can. And then some research came out about phosphatidylserine decreasing cortisol during intense exercise. So I did a little, personal experiment with me and some of my friends, and just said, well, yeah, if we chronically take this phosphatidylserine, and will it lower our cortisol all over, throughout the day? And it did. So I added some phosphatidylserine to it. But that's it. Everything that's in that product is in your food. It's all supposed to be in your body. I always give the metaphors, like I'm bringing lumber to the construction site. You still have to do the things that you're supposed to do to get ready for sleep. So unlike alcohol or Ambien, you can't act like a moron and take this and still fall asleep. Like you still need to have some sleep hygiene. You still need to pay attention to your circadian rhythms and cool, dark environment, decrease your activities, all that type of stuff. And it, like I said, it's an insurance policy, a daily vitamin kind of thing, that you're just making sure that everything's there when your brain's trying to do what it needs to do to cause you to fall asleep and to stay asleep. And because it's just nutrients, like there's nothing in it that makes you sleepy. It's just providing you with the tools you need to be able to have a healthy sleep. So it won't make you groggy or anything like that, because it doesn't have any sedative effects or anything like that.
That's good stuff. And I have probably been able to titrate myself off of everything that the people at a large regional hospital here in Tampa have given me for years. And
there's a lot of creativity in that field now that Ambien's gone. There's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Depressants, antipsychotics, pain medication, all kinds of stuff that give people more sleep.
This was made from shoe leather and gorilla. I'm like, what? It's not used for sleep. Better to help you sleep. It's so hammered to the forehead. But
right.
I've gotten myself off of all of that stuff. The exception of fish oil. I still do the Jocko Super Krill or whatever that is. I haven't looked at the label in a while. I'm a big fan of this. But anyway, that's really all I do. That protein, clean food and all that stuff. And now that I've regulated my sleep and I've figured it out, I'm going to go today. I want to be able to announce this during our episode. I'm going to go to docparsley.com and get myself a bucket of the Doc Parsley Sleep Remedy and try it out myself, because I know there's nothing in me right now. So if it works, it's going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the fact you're living so clean means it'll definitely work. Right.
But not so clean. I had lasagna for lunch. Well, clean-ish. I made the lasagna myself. So
yeah,
a lot of sausage in there, but
yeah. When people contact me and say, "Hey, I've been on Ambien and an antidepressant and antipsychotic for 15 years. Will your product help me?" I'm like, absolutely not. I mean, it'll help. It'll help by like 5 or 10%, but you have to do. There's a lot of work to be done there, right? So it's better than nothing, but it's not going to solve all that. Like, you got to work with your physician if you're on all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, my physician was wonderful, but they don't talk to the psychs at the VA. So, yeah, they all work in the same building, but they're not speaking to each other, which is amazing to me. Hopefully that'll change here in Western medicine soon enough. But,
yeah, I hope so.
Any parting thoughts? Where can folks find you?
You said it, docparsley.com, and that has all my social media on it, but all my social medias are either Kirk Parsley or Doc Parsley.
Well, I know you're on LinkedIn. I know you're on Instagram under Kirk Parsley, and docparsley.com. Obviously, it's there. All this stuff will be in the show notes. And Doc, I want to thank you. This is a big treat for me. I've wanted to talk to you and be able to pick your brain on this about 2 years now.
So it all came about. I'm happy I could be helpful, man. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate you. All right. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Tell This Story. I hope you found today's conversation with Dr. Kirk Parsley as insightful, as inspiring as I did. If you'd like to connect with Doc Parsley or try the Doc Parsley Sleep Remedy, go to docparsley.com or on Instagram at Kirk Parsley. A huge thank you to Polestar Coffee for sponsoring this episode and our show. Fuel your mission with the best blends. Visit polestarcoffee.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Every rating helps us continue to share these important stories. Follow me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, or visit dougwhiteofficial.com for all my links. We'd love to hear from you. Share your feedback, suggest guests, or tell us about any topics you'd like us to cover. Thank you for tuning in to tell this story, and remember, there's always a way forward. We'll see you next time.